Sure.
Hello, people of Connecticut. My name is Selena Rifkin. I am here with Mr. Jay Anderson and Michael Goldstein, who is running for CT4. That's Jim Himes. So he's going to tell us a little bit about his campaign and how he's going to run it. And we probably should bring up Iran because this is an international issue, and I don't know how your opponents feel about that particular thing. And you might have some personal feelings about that. I'm sure that you remember it like I do.
Yeah, unfortunately, I do. Sure. So, let me tell you a little bit about myself before we get
Please,
started. Sure.
please.
So, my name is Michael Goldstein. I'm a physician, an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon, and I'm also an attorney. I ran as the Republican candidate for Congress in 2024 after winning a primary. And Unfortunately, we had an very heavily underfunded campaign. And yet we did respectfully, but from that campaign, we learned about essentially what you need to do to win. And this is a winnable election. Most people think it's not because it's like a D12 or D13, all the political pundits, come up with this stuff. But it's 40% unaffiliated voters. And the whole key to winning this kind of an election is really to get a strong turnout from the unaffiliates and to win with the Republicans actually turning out. And I mean that's it in a nutshell. And the campaign that I'm going to be running is really deals with a lot of the bread and butter issues that affect people in their everyday lives in Connecticut. And Connecticut's a state, frankly, I mean, if you're not upset with the way things have gone in Connecticut since the recession of 2008, then there's something terribly wrong. Connecticut has had since 2008, which is by the way the year Jim Himes got elected, the economy of the state of Connecticut has stagnated. We have now the second highest utility rates in the country. We have among the highest taxes in the country. We have affordability issues. We have transport. We have terrible roads in my congressional district. In fact, Interstate 95 is one of the worst roads in the country,
That's
and the
true.
average person. And the reality is that there's a huge interplay between the federal government and the state. And in our particular state, everything is Democrat. We have Democrat senators, Democrat congressmen, Democrat state senate, Democrat House, Democrat governor, and basically they're not working for the people of Connecticut. And I think that and we have huge problems. One of the ones that seems to bother people a lot and bothers me is the incredible skyrocketing price of electricity. Electricity has become somewhat unaffordable. It used to be in my house, the electric bills were pretty high in the summer because we ran air conditioning, but they were very modest in the winter. And now the electric bills in the winter are what the summer bills used to be like.
Mm.
And there's some crazy reasons. One of them, of course, is this public benefit, which is something I've been talking about for more than 2 years, and since it first came out and at least became publicly available. But the big problem is that in the United States there's a huge demand for electricity. Electrical demand is going to double within the next decade, and the reality is that any state that wants to survive has to basically increase its capacity to produce electricity in order to meet this huge demand. And the current governor and the current federal elected officials are doing nothing to help the state of Connecticut be prepared for this to survive in this impending crisis. So our electricity comes from two main sources: natural gas and nuclear. The nuclear at Millstone, those are aging nuclear reactors, and there are ways, and there's nothing being done to add more nuclear reactors and expand the nuclear energy production in this state. The second problem is natural gas. Now, our natural gas comes by pipeline,
Right.
and all three of our pipelines pass through the state of New York. And
Mm.
under existing federal law, the governor of the state of New York can veto any expansion or construction of new pipelines that pass through the state of New York.
And
I
he
think
has.
that's essentially a stranglehold. And yet none of the federal legislators in Connecticut have a push to have the law changed to revoke that power. That power is granted under federal law. That power can be taken away under federal law. And
Mhm.
yet, none of them, not Jim Himes, not Murphy, not Blumenthal, because they actually believe that the real solution is green energy, and somehow sunshine and wind is somehow going to provide all the energy needs of the people of the state of Connecticut, and including, electric cars, and somehow all it's just going to come from the sky. And I think it's not realistic, and it's also foolish because what happens when there's no sun? What happens when there's no wind? And by the way, we're not the sunniest state in the world. I mean, let me look at the winters. We don't even have that much sunlight. It's a
Can you tell us exactly what percentage of our power comes from wind and solar?
Wind and solar is like 2-3%. It's pretty
Yeah,
low. I
it's
mean,
pretty low.
it's and now what they're doing is they're building these windmills with Rhode Island and the Sound. And it's together it's going to generate about 700 megawatts of electricity. Now, one of the proposals that I've had, along with my son Jonathan, who's going to be running probably for a state office, was to take decommissioned nuclear submarines and take those nuclear power plants and convert them for civilian use. Now, it's not necessarily going to be cheap, but in one nuclear
Pretty
submarine
quickly,
generates
relatively.
230 megawatts of electricity. So three decommissioned nuclear subs would generate the same amount of electricity as this entire windmill project is. So
Mm.
there's a potential there. I mean, to do it. I mean, we've spoken to some nuclear engineers. It's feasible. I mean, the problem with the nuclear submarines is that the power plant is encased. So they have to essentially, they open them up because they used to have to refuel them, and they take them apart and they put new rods in, and then they weld them back together and they seal them up. I mean, it costs about $600 million for them to redo them, on these submarines. So maybe it's probably could be $1 billion to probably put it together for a nuclear power plant. But considering the fact that if you were to build a nuclear power plant for the same size from scratch, it would cost $4 million, $4.2 billion. So we
That
can.
sounds like a bargain to me.
It sounds, even if it's 2 billion, it's still a bargain. So I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
so it sounds like a bargain to me. And, I mean, obviously, it would take a lot of work, and it would also create some good jobs for Electric Boat in Connecticut, since that's where they make the submarines. So, and it would also save the disposal costs. So you would have to subtract the disposal costs as
Mhm.
well, because they wouldn't have to pay to dispose of them. So, I think it's a great idea. But the point is, there's no planning at all for the future in this state. I mean, for the future need of nuclear power. Now,
Mhm.
more than 150 years ago, New York City realized that they were going to expand their population. So they built a reservoir system in anticipation of having more people. So that's why New York City has a great water supply.
Wow.
Here, there's no forward thinking at all.
Mhm.
And I think that, and as I said, the green energy is not the solution. So there could be a time, if we don't do anything, where not only will electricity be outrageously overpriced, but it might not even be available. I mean,
Yeah.
what are people going to do? This is absolute suicide for a state. If you have
Hmm.
a state where you can't generate enough electricity for your population, you have no future. I mean, it's purely ridiculous.
What do you think about, yeah, and I'm thinking, my thought about this is that it's maybe an interim measure, maybe some waste to energy plants in the meantime, because it's going to take a little while for that sort of thing to happen.
Well, it's going to take a long time to build pipelines. It's going to take a long time
Yeah,
to.
that's that too.
But the point is, but we're not even starting. We're
No,
not
no,
even.
fair enough.
You have to start now if you want to have them. You want to have stuff available. I mean, the only other thing we can do is, we have these diesel generating systems, and of course, they're much more polluting than the natural gas. So I mean, it's since everyone's so concerned about green energy, they're actually going to create a situation where the only kind of energy that we're going to generate is probably dirty energy, because there's going to be nothing else, and then all this nonsense of clean the environment gets thrown in the basket. It's just unbelievable, that any state that wants to develop and progress isn't have a long range plan of how to do it. And there's no long range plan in Connecticut, at least in terms of energy.
Yeah, that's kind of been the biggest joke that we've come across as we've been covering stuff throughout the last couple of months is We kind of kowtow to other states around us rather than just being proactive and getting out in front of it. And I remember back when Roland was in office, we had so many opportunities in the state because he was doing the tax incentive to get corporations back into the area. And that's what was pissing off New York as they were losing companies to Connecticut. Meanwhile, Lamont has done absolutely nothing to try to get more headquarters back into the state. In fact, he's lost about 900 companies that have moved out. And with that, it gives up our bargaining power to go to the state of New York and say, listen, we're not going to continue to offer people free taxes to come here from your state if you are willing to build the pipeline like we need. He just hasn't expanded on
There's
anything.
no bargaining whatsoever.
Right. And not only that, but even as we develop more AI technology that requires most of the electricity, we should be talking to some of these companies and saying, we will give you a tax incentive to come here, but you have to pay X, Y, and Z to help us convert or build new infrastructure when it comes to electricity to help lower the
And they
rates.
have
Because
water
the,
issues as well, not just
yeah,
electricity. So that could
well,
be an additional problem.
the common talking point that I've been seeing now, and I don't know if you've seen this, Michael, but the Democrats are now blaming the Republicans for the Pura benefits. And they're saying that we are the ones that passed that. And it's like, how could we be the ones that passed that if we've never had a majority in the state in the last 20 years?
Well, yeah, that's a great that's the other issue, and that's the water issue, and essentially, once again, they run the state, they're responsible. This is so sick, and so it's such deflection, and people that are really upset about that pure conversion. Because then the other thing that happens with that conversion, since it's a state agency, there are towns in my district where there's watershed towns where they actually get real estate tax money from EverSource, which owns Aquarian, and once Pura takes over, they'll have no obligation to pay any real estate taxes. So those towns are also losing out on income tax, plus the rates are going up. And once again, it's just another reason why people shouldn't want to stay in the state of Connecticut. I have the fortune and misfortune of having a well, which has its own headaches associated with it. There's the things break down, that have to be
Yep.
fixed.
There's
If it's really
maintenance.
dry, you don't get as much water. I mean, so I don't irrigate on my lawn, but supposedly people that do irrigate lawns with wells can dry them out. So it's
Oh,
not
yeah,
a
you can
perfect
run a well
world.
dry. You can absolutely run a well dry, no question.
So it's not a perfect world, but I mean, at least though in one sense, I mean, I at least have some control of my own destiny. But I think that that's not really the solution. The solution is much different, but it so you have a state that's running out of water, running out of electricity, no plans for the future, and you wonder why things are not heading in the right direction. It's really unbelievable that the voters of the state don't understand any of this. And it's part of my job as running, and part of your job as communicators, is to let people know what's going on. Because one of the biggest problems that we have, and one of the reasons that Republicans lose, is because the average voter is unaware of what's going on. The media tells them nothing. And by and large, if they wake up in the morning and they get their kids off to school and they're paying their bills and life is okay, they don't seem to really have that much interest in going and understanding what's going on in the political landscape. So what generally seems to happen is that people will, they won't even know who most of the people are running. If they like Lamont, they'll just go straight across and vote for Democrats. If they like who's ever running as a Republican, they'll vote for that person. And there's a huge need to educate the voters. And part of the way that I can win an election is to educate the voters and show them why the current people where Jim Hines specifically, why he is not doing his job for the people of Connecticut, and why, and not even for the people of the country, and why he has some really crazy ideas that are really harmful. So, for example, there was an act that I don't think it got passed, was called the Violence Against Women by Illegal Aliens Act, in which illegal aliens who were committing violence against women or children would be deported. Jim Hines voted
This
against
is
it.
uncomplicated, at least from my point of view.
What?
Yeah.
Seems uncomplicated, at least.
Seems like, oh, his line was that he claimed that, there was no due process, but the bottom line is the only people that could be deported are people that were convicted or admitted they committed the crime. So it was nonsense. It was just, I mean, you understand that the rapists, who were running, well, I mean, let's face it, they're not Republican voters. So, and, then the same thing with this, the SAVE Act, he votes against that too. The idea that you actually have to prove that you're a citizen, and they have this whole story that women can't prove they're citizens because that are married because they changed their name. I mean, come on. I mean, I see that you're palpitating from this, and yet, if you have one of those, like
I'm a woman, I can't think of anything. Oh my God.
I mean, you get your driver's license, and it has your name on it. The driver's license is the ones you need to fly with. You have to prove you're a citizen and prove your address. I mean, I just, it's the problem is, the real reason is that there's a lot of election fraud.
Go for it. We talk about that all the time here.
And I could tell you last time around when we were in Bridgeport. My son was with me, and we went to the government center in the early voting, and when we had this boombox, we were playing this wonderful song that my son had written, and somebody sang in it about, and it was like, and the part of it said, "Tell Himes to take a hike," and we're playing it like outside, and and then some of the political operatives were coming up to us, and they were kind of friendly to us, but they were just they give these people a piece of paper, and they tell them how to vote. Now, I'm not sure what the payback is for actually handing the paper back and saying I did it, but it wouldn't surprise me. And then, of course, obviously, it took like 3 times it took like 3 to 5 days for them to count the votes in Bridgeport, and every other town in the state had them counted within 24 hours. So you knew something was amiss, to say the least. And there are allegations of election irregularities in some of our other towns and cities, and the bottom line is, by having election integrity and fair elections, well, maybe different people would get elected, and better yet, maybe people that would actually run the state better and run the country better, and or at least be federal advocates for the people of Connecticut would get elected. So it's really an assault on our democracy, and I think that anybody that believes in American democracy should believe in election integrity. But once again, not Jim Himes.
Tell us a little bit more about Himes. What can you tell us about his history? Because honestly, personally, I'm new to this political field. I only dove into this last year, and I don't know a lot about Himes.
Okay, so Jim Himes is a guy who he went to Harvard, and when he was at Harvard, he spent 2 months in Nicaragua, studying the Sandinista government, which is a communist Marxist government in Nicaragua. And then he wrote a 95-page essay glorifying how wonderful it was. And
Awesome.
he talks about, how dictators, control people by, basically re-educating the children, essentially brainwashing them to, power. And it was, and the idea of a political elite, all this kind of stuff. And then he worked for a while for Goldman Sachs, and then he went into politics. And when he got elected in 2008, the Communist Party of America would, listed some of the people they were excited had gotten elected, and Jim Himes was one of them. So he certainly is not. He's essentially a socialist who pretends to be a moderate. Mm-hmm. And he aligns, and he's probably has a lot of similar ideas to Zoran Mondami, but he probably tries to keep them quiet until maybe they become more.
Till it's time to vote.
Till it's time to vote, right? So he's, it's interesting. I think he's mostly maintained a kind of a low profile in most of his career, and and it's a Democrat state, so people just vote Democrat and they vote for him. He certainly hasn't brought significant federal dollars to the state of Connecticut, and one of the areas that I have a lot of concern about is Interstate 95 in Lower Fairfield County, and it's considered one of the worst roads in the country. And 80% of the federal dollars that would fix that road, 80% of the money comes from the federal government to fix a highway. And he certainly has done nothing to do that. And there are different ways to make 95 work better, and they've done minimal attempts at that. One of them is, expanding the off ramps, because if you have a 3-lane road and one lane everybody's getting off, you have a 2-lane road. So if you have a longer exit ramp, and then you go back to 3 lanes. The other thing that can be done, if you look in lots of parts of 95, if you move the lines around, and you can turn the median space into an HOV lane during rush hour, and you could add a lane. And in other places where the road's not wide enough to do that, which is essentially through downtown Stamford, you could do what they've done on the Golden Gate Bridge, what they did on the and Brooklyn Queens Expressway, and it's called, where you have a movable divider, so that you can have 4 lanes going in the direction of heavier traffic, 2 in the other, so that there are things that can be done to make it better. It's not going to be perfect, but it certainly would be a lot better than it is. And these are feasible things that could be done in the near future, rather than some massive project that could take decades. The other thing about it, is it takes people's time a lot. And so it's been estimated the average person that commutes on that road loses 134 hours a year due to traffic congestion. What an incredible waste of time. And so this is one of the things we campaign on is, if you're stuck in traffic, blame Jim Himes. And and he should be blamed for not doing anything. Him and Governor Lamont should be blamed for failing to expand. But the problem is, since they're into this green energy stuff, they don't want you to use a car. They want you to use mass transit.
They want to disincentivize it.
So if the roads become totally impassable, then you'll have no choice. I mean, to me, that might be the strategy, which is kind of dumb. But and if you think about what America has been about, at the end of World War II, you had all these GIs that came back, and the things that they wanted were, they wanted a good job, they wanted to own a house, they wanted to raise a family, have kids that got a good education, and they wanted to have a car. And the Democrats essentially want to take every single one of those things away. They want to take your house away, and they want everyone to live in apartments, and they want to destroy single family housing zoning. They want to take away your house. They want to take control of your children in the school system, where you have no say, including in gender altering surgery, which is in California. At least the Supreme Court just made a ruling which makes it illegal, for at least in the short term, while the case is being heard, not to notify parents. So that's taking away your education, turning education into brainwashing. They want to they're destroying jobs in the state of Connecticut, and they don't want you to use a car. So essentially, all of the things that the freedoms that people wanted, that after the end of World War II, and then deserved from the efforts that they made in risking their lives and fighting against evil, the Democrats want to take away. And I think it's a destruction of of the American dream, and it's unacceptable. And people have to start fighting back against all this stuff.
Yeah, so at least I saw on a couple of things I want to touch on. The state was trying to put tolls back up to help cover costs for the DOT to rebuild the roads. I believe Lamont spent a ridiculous amount of money just doing a survey, hiring consultants just for them to say, we're not going to do it. The second thing is, I did see a report that they are considering doing those movable dividers. The DOT is looking into that. It's probably not going to work, because the DOT always manages to mess something up. And then the third thing is, I find it ironic that you've got so many young voters that are millennials and younger that are voting Democrat, that constantly complain about not being able to afford a house. And they don't realize why they can't afford a house is because of the Democrats that they vote for.
Well, I think you're right, and I actually want to touch on to a few points about that. So the first part of it is, I believe that there needs to be a federal law that creates transparency in education. So when you attend a university, number one, you should know where your tuition dollar is going, and I think only about a quarter of your tuition dollars goes to pay the people to teach you. So that's the first point. They should disclose where your money goes, so that if you're choosing between 2 colleges, maybe one college is spending their money a little wiser than the other, or maybe even less expensive because they're not wasting as much. The second point is that there should be a, for every major, whatever you want to major in, there should be a information regarding what has happened to people who've graduated with that degree. What kind of, like, for example, like what their grades were and what percent got a job, how much did that job pay, and what percent didn't get a job. So that if you're going to sit there and you're going to go and look at a major, and half the people that graduate with that degree don't get a job, why would you spend the money in tuition to do that? So I think that there needs to be, that students should know before they start. If you go to X, Y, and Z school and you want to major in philosophy, or you want to major in computer science, or you want to major in engineering, or you want to major in Russian literature, what's your job prospects? How much can you expect to get paid, and what is the likelihood of you even finding a job at all, so that you can make an intelligent decision as to whether or not this is the right choice. And maybe you might pick a career that's actually going to essentially make it worthwhile for you to have graduated from college, and that you can. So that's number one. And I think there's a lot of people who have graduated college who have degrees in something which is not marketable. And I think that they've been betrayed. The second part we have in Connecticut is we have about 100,000 openings in various trades. We don't have enough plumbers, we don't have enough electricians or HVAC people and machinists, or and a whole bunch of other trades. And there should be a need for federal programs to assist creating trade schools and apprenticeship programs so that people can acquire these skills, and then they can earn middle-class incomes. And certainly somebody who is qualified as a plumber can also go out and become their own business person. And so there's a lot of opportunities that are lost because we're not providing the opportunities for a lot of people to have jobs. The final question is the issue of housing. And you ask, why is housing unaffordable? And this, once again, this is the same. This is how there's two examples of how this problem has been solved. At the end of World War II, throughout the country, there were areas that were previously, shall we say, farmland or unused land, that were then real estate developers would take over, and in an assembly line process, build large volumes of houses very, very efficiently, and were able to sell them at an affordable price. Now, with a prefab house, you can do that today if you can get a low enough land cost. And you can build a house for what it would cost to rent an apartment, and you can also build smaller apartment buildings the same way. And one of the ideas that I thought of, which is a way of rather than going into expensive neighborhoods and destroying them, is going into neighborhoods that have failed, and rebuilding them, because that way you create wealth and you rebuild cities. Is take parts of cities that have basically been laid desolate, where they've been sort of destroyed, burned down, factories closed, and with huge parking lots and all kinds of other things, and then create what I would call a 21st century version of the Homestead Act, where the government would take this land by eminent domain. They'd allow you to build your prefab. By the way, the most cost-effective ones are two-level attached townhouses, because one of the big expenses in a prefab is the roof. And you build these, and then you would be leasing the land from the government for a certain amount of years. If you live there a certain amount of time, then the title of the land goes to yours, and it's your land and it's your house. And which is so that you can create affordability. You could rebuild neighborhoods that have previously been demolished. They would also bring businesses into service, the people that were now moving into these communities. It's a form of gentrification, but it's gentrification of desolate properties. And then with a school choice option, you don't get stuck with these horrible schools, and you can get your child educated. And to me, it's a winning combination. So that certainly are things that you can do. And incidentally, if interest rates remain too high, one of the other ways you can lower the interest rate on these loans is through these tax-free bond options. For example, nonprofits raise money through these various state agencies like the Housing Authority or others, where the money is raised as tax-free bonds, and then that money is then used to provide mortgages, so that you could lower mortgage rates that way, and the investors are okay because they're getting their income tax-free, so if it's a lower yield, they're okay. And so ways that you can make housing affordable. Except nobody's doing it. Well, all they want is they want to just create large amounts of rental units because you're not supposed to own anything in the socialist world. You're supposed to be a renter, and then they have these like sham entities like Desegregate Connecticut, which is actually funded by the Regional Planning Association, which is a New York-based charity that's dominated by real estate people in the real estate business, and these people are just a front, and essentially the real estate developers are looking at these as just an opportunity to make money, when the real goal should be to provide affordable owned housing, not rental housing. And if you own something, number one, you're going to have a greater stake in the community. You're also going to build equity, and when it's time to leave, you leave your house, you get a check. When you're a renter, when you leave your house, you just turn in the keys, and that's it. So why shouldn't we? So these are things that I think that need to be done. So certainly, especially to help our young, to help working class people, and I think that none of this is being done.
Yeah, no, I mean, and so I'm sure you're familiar with what HUD is, right? The U.S. Department of what is it, Housing and Urban
But
Development.
yeah, housing and urban development. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you kind of want to expand on that a little bit when you're talking about taking over some of these parking lots because HUD right now they take foreclosed homes and they just sell them back, and it's similar to what you were explaining where over time you kind of become an owner of that property, but you're paying the federal government for it. And I know Lamont has talked about, oh, we need to build homes, but he hasn't done anything to really show how we're going to build homes in this state. And especially with zoning laws being so ridiculous and on a town or municipal level, it makes it very hard for developers to want to invest in this state. So it seems like we need better relief, and especially on the federal level, we need kind of a more overseeing approach by HUD to come in and say, listen, you've got to open up, regardless of what your politics are, you have to open up the land to be developed because how it's going right now is just it's a little I don't want to say too conservative, but it's almost anti-American in the approach that these towns have taken, which is let's not expand, let's keep it as is or shrink. So it seems like HUD needs to come in and do something, and it sounds like that's similar to what you're saying, where you want to expand on HUD and have the state or the federal government take over some of these empty areas in these cities and just turn it into properties. Does that kind of encapsulate a little bit of
Yeah,
what you're talking about?
it does encapsulate. But you see, the other thing too is, I mean, look, there are some towns there is that. See, the problem in the current laws that the state's passing is they're giving each town a burden and a responsibility when in fact under some bizarre theory that like nobody has to commute. If you're getting some sort of housing bonus from the government, you don't have to commute. And yet, living in Lower Fairfield County, the overwhelming majority of people here are commuters. Why is it okay for me to commute and have to pay for my own house from my own labor, while somebody who's getting a subsidy is too good to commute? I mean, that seems very that seems like an absurd idea. So that certainly there should be there should be areas in regional, there should be incentives, for example, to take parcels of land and develop it. And by the way, there are towns that are probably somewhat a little more rural and maybe a little further out that could suddenly have take a vacant piece of farmland and turn it into a housing development and to attract people and taxpayers and grow their communities. I mean that's exactly what happened in World War II. I mean, after World War II, you had the entire San Fernando Valley was built. You had large parts of Orange County were built. Most of Long Island and Nassau and Suffolk County were built post World War II, because and a lot of and a lot of that was essentially undeveloped land or was farmland. It was and so we have places in Connecticut that fit the same bill, and and once again, if a town that's that wants to prosper and wants to grow, they have to make decisions and decide that we want to develop, we want to we don't want to be this little hamlet, we can't pay our bills, we can't afford a school, and we want to become a vibrant community, and certainly there are a lot. When I drove up to the Cadillac Ranch from Greenwich, I mean, I drove through areas where there was next to nothing, very undeveloped.
There's
I
a
mean,
lot of empty space in Connecticut
there's
still.
a lot of empty space, and then
Mhm.
why not convert some of that empty space into housing? Why not convert, run down? There's a whole section in Bridgeport near where the Remington factory is, where you just see blocks and blocks that have been just leveled, and some of it were parking lots where employees went. Some of it, I don't know what it was. There's parts of Bridgeport and Hartford
Mhm.
and lots of other towns that are just have basically
That seems like
they
it'd be an ideal place. So you said that there's
Yeah.
such a thing as, I mean, I watch a lot of YouTube, and they have lots of prefab houses. I didn't realize that they were prefab like townhouses, and that seems like a great
Yeah.
option.
You apparently you can build a prefab house for the actual cost of construction. And I even spoke to somebody from one of the Greenwich affordable housing communities here. You can build a prefab for about $200,000. And if you figure if the interest rate's low enough and the taxes are low enough and there's no land cost, it's less expensive than than renting an apartment. I mean, it's
Right.
doable,
Yeah.
and I mean, obviously they're not going to be luxurious, but the point is if they have bathrooms and they have bedrooms and they have kitchens, I mean, it's yours, even if it's not the furthest, you can always make it nicer.
Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I mean, I had friends who grew up in townhouses, and they customized them. It's like they had a very narrow little
Mhm.
space. They made a beautiful little patio out front, and they had space out back. Yeah, they. I remember those things being built, and believe it or not, in Bridgeport, Pennsylvania, because that's where I
Yeah,
grew
well,
up.
must
So,
be.
but it was, but yeah, it was. They were able to very individualize them, and it was a great option for my friends. I had two friends who lived in these places.
Right, and with the prefab technology, it's even because it's even easier because they just kind of they put them up. It's a lot. It's much more cost effective because you're manufacturing it in a factory, and once again, it's economy of scale. I mean, the whole key is economy of scale when you're doing something like that, and it should be. You could also since there's probably only a few varieties of plans, then the approvals should be quick, should be facilitated because each one's the same
Right.
or similar.
Very
And
straightforward.
and these structures also don't have basements, so there's no excavation. They're slab floors.
Right.
A lot of the housing in Southern California is just slabs. So I mean, it's they pour the concrete slab.
Mhm.
They run the pipes through it and
Mhm.
put the house down, and I don't. It's not, it could be quick and efficient and affordable. And once again, you need developers that are willing to make less on each house and work on volume. And it's just like fast food. I mean, in the old days, fast food was inexpensive, not anymore. But the idea was sell things cheaply and sell a lot. And it's the same. It's the
Well,
same
there's
concept.
there's the market, there's the market value, and you have to, what's happening right now in the market is that the government is going in and asking what the developers want, finding out what they want and subsidizing that with laws and incentives. And they're not asking what we want. We want homes. We
Right.
don't want apartments, we want homes.
Well, the reason for that is once again, is if you look at the economics, the developers have used these front organizations, as I said, desegregate Connecticut. If you look at desegregate Connecticut, it doesn't have its own tax ID number.
Mhm.
It receives its money from the Regional Planning Association, which is, as I said, dominated by New York State real estate interests. So when you got this front of people saying, "Oh, we're for the poor people," and yet we're getting all our money from rich real estate developers. I mean,
Right,
it's a total scam.
right.
Not only
And
that, but people, real estate agents are going to say that those manufactured homes that you're talking about are depreciating assets, but in reality, if they're built on permanent foundations, they are appreciating assets. As long as the land and the foundation is owned by the occupants, it will be an appreciating asset. And most real estate agents, they want that big money. They don't want to go through a government entity to sell houses or buy houses. So they're going to complain left and right that, oh, it's not worth it. Let's get our renters into better housing, often the distance in the rural areas. So I just want to clarify because people will push back on this. It is a appreciating asset according to finance principle. So it's getting banks to understand that, as well as the real estate agents to understand that this is a very lucrative opportunity if this is done correctly.
well, once again, it's the issue of volume. And if you're going to sell 20 houses, even if you make less on each house, you're still doing okay. And I mean, and it's just like, once again, it's like everything else. It's, think of the Monopoly game. Once again, you put your little hotel on Baltic Avenue. It's not as valuable, but it's still hotel.
Right.
And it's the same point. But once again, those neighborhoods change. So now you take, let's say, a depressed area of Hartford or Bridgeport, and you take this, what's fallow land, or with rundown, broken down houses, and then suddenly you have like a whole neighborhood. Well, what
Hmm.
do you think's going to happen? Well, first of all, some of the people are going to be young. They're going to have growing families, and they're going to want to flip that house at some time and buy something a little bit bigger someplace else. So then you create a market, that you create turnover. So it and also you create gentrification, and the values go up. I mean, look what happened in places like New York City. You took areas that were downtown, like Tribeca and Soho. I mean, you had abandoned factory lofts, and suddenly they became super luxury apartments. It didn't go from abandoned loft to super luxury, but slowly but surely it appreciated in value. And here again too, you have a nice little neighborhood in Bridgeport, and then suddenly you've got a whole nice houses, and in middle class, working class people raising their families in there. They have pride of ownership, because now maybe the first time they're owning something, and they take pride in the neighborhood. And then there's restaurants that'll have to go in there, supermarkets, people to fix your car, and a million other industries. And then all of a sudden, you've redeveloped an area that was worthless, and you've made it valuable. And if it's, and it becomes like a nice neighborhood, and it's a safe neighborhood, people say, hey, this isn't a place I might want to live.
Right.
And someone says, okay, well, I got this townhouse, it's a little small, I got a couple of kids, let me see if I can find something bigger someplace else. And then, so I think that, there's huge potential there.
Yeah, I would say, and as a kind of like a precedence for this, if you look at Mansfield, which that's where Yukon is, Mansfield is a huge kind of farming town, and then once they started to build this random city called Storrs, Connecticut, you can see what they can do in the middle of nowhere. It's like a mini city that becomes a destination because of how many different restaurants and shopping plazas are there, as well as, I mean, there's 14,000 students that are living off campus, but it shows you that you can take kind of rural areas and turn it into a mini city almost overnight. I mean, with Yukon, they're always building new facilities, whether it's for housing or whatever else, like the dairy barn, they're expanding that. That is state money that is expanding that whole town. And it shows you that once the state gets involved, they can do wonderful things. They're just choosing not to expand on some of these other towns the way that you're talking about, which is just weird because Yukon has been a testament of look what we can do when we put our brains together and we allow the university to expand and we allow people to come in and live here. It has turned into an economic center for this part of the state because I'm about 10 minutes from Yukon. So a lot of people go to Yukon just because of the facilities there, whether it's the restaurants or not, because there's not a lot of other things in the area. So it like that's what always confused me is why aren't we doing this more in smaller areas of the state, like in Torrington or Litchfield County, Tallinn County, and then what is it? The one that's south of us. I can never remember the name of it, but there's nothing out here, and then you build the university, and all of a sudden you've got like a new city fresh on the other side of the state. So I agree with you, and I think that we can do great things when we use our money effectively as taxpayers, but it seems they only care about using money for themselves and to push the agenda, which is let's create more liberal voters or I don't want to call them dumber, but it seems like people look the other way when things are going well for them based off of who's in charge. And as hard as we've had trying to get the word out, I just you brought it up earlier, like we are communicators, but no matter how much we communicate, people are just so stubborn that they think that the Democrats are doing everything right for them. And it just concerns me because I've tried so hard for people my own age, because I'm a millennial, and they just don't care. they either don't vote or they're just saying, oh, the Republicans don't have a shot anyway, so I might as well just vote for somebody on the left. And it's like that's the worst thing you can do. That's why they keep getting elected. Look at what they've done. Look at what they haven't done, I should say. And you bring up a lot of points that I've discussed, and that's what's concerning a lot of millennials. So I truly think that millennials are that group that we have to break through to get them to start voting Republican again.
Well, it's interesting. Apparently the Gen Z voters are probably more prone to vote Republican than the millennials.
Right.
The problem with you know millennials is they have this, they kind of believe that they can just get everything they want from their phone, and it's there's like which is in some ways has it's convenient, but in the other ways it's not necessarily good. I mean, it's nice to be able to go into a supermarket and actually like look at what you're buying before you buy it. It's nice to it's nice to go to a store and I mean, I know my wife sometimes orders stuff online and it looks great, and the pictures and stuff comes and it's nothing like what it looks like, so there's got to be a high percentage of the stuff going back. But if you actually just like physically walked into the place that stores that are selling it, you wouldn't. First of all, you wouldn't buy stuff that you didn't need, and that you didn't like. And secondly, and once again, if you look at if you look at the amount of cardboard that's being wasted on these boxes coming and going, if you're an environmentalist and now all of a sudden like you're the cardboard king of of your neighborhood, then maybe you're not such an environmentalist. I am, to use the Greenwich dump. I dump my own garbage, and you'll see sometimes in the recycling thing, the place is just filled with cardboard boxes, and people actually got off their butts and went to stores. They wouldn't buy stuff they didn't need, and you would have a lot less of this stuff. But and I think that also there's this brainwashing, that's in the universities about this liberalism, which to me is just really it's unfortunate, because the people that are teaching these classes are all the same. I mean, when my nephews went to the USC, they were conservatives, and they couldn't let any of their professors know they were conservatives, because they'd get lower grades because they disagreed with the professor. I mean, so when you're in an environment where you don't have academic freedom, it's academic brainwashing. Then these millennials are the product of these institutions that have brainwashed them, and they need to be unbrainwashed. And it's this is really the whole idea of changing this country and bringing it back to sanity really is about educating people and getting the message out. And when there's no social media to do it, and then it's much harder. So, for example, running as a campaign, I mean, last time we ran a congressional campaign, which included a convention, a primary, and an election, on like $140,000, which is, I mean, that's a joke. A lot of these federal campaigns are like $10 million, and yet we did text messaging. We sent out targeted text messages we sent out over 2 million targeted text messages where I would go and make these videos on the phone about different subjects, and we'd send the text to different groups of people, and and that's how one of the ways we reached them. We had the pop-up ads and some of the other stuff, and I think we had 6 million hits or something, but the problem is it wasn't enough, because you still have to counteract the mainstream media, and you still have to get people to understand that woke liberalism doesn't work,
Right.
and and that essentially people have to, be creative. People have to have some entrepreneurial spirit to themselves, and especially as we going through these changes with AI, and the markets become disrupted. People have to be a little bit more creative as to how they prosper economically. And one of the things that somebody pointed out when I talked about the trade schools is, well, AI isn't going to fix your leaking pipe, or your broken air conditioner, or your refrigerator that doesn't work. So I mean, but the point is that attitudes have to change, and people have to be enlightened, and that's one of the necessities of this process.
So how are you conducting your campaign? Are you walking out and door knocking? You mentioned text messaging before.
Well, the Connecticut campaigns is sort of strange. So the first part of the campaign involves a convention. So what happens is in my district, there's 17 towns, and then each town gets a certain amount of delegates to a congressional convention, and then they elect the candidate. I mean, there's only one other person that's running, and I'm not going to say anything about him, but I I think I'm a far better candidate, and I think that.
Well, you wouldn't be running if you didn't think that. And if you
Look, you understand. Like last time around, there were three people in a convention, and one of them is the guy that's running, and the election went to two rounds, and that he was eliminated after the first round, and then I wound up with 47% of the vote, and then I went into a primary. And what's interesting is that in a primary, I'm actually the first person in the fourth district where the endorsed candidate lost the primary, and I won by 7.5%. And the reason that the endorsed candidate usually wins is because on the ballot, if you're the endorsed candidate, there's a star next to your name, and you're on row A.
You mean endorsed by the Republican Party? Is that
yes,
okay.
exactly. So what happens is now, if the person sits to vote, they don't know anything. They show up and they say, "I'll vote for the guy with the star next to their name, or the woman with the star next to their name." So we had to overcome that, which we did, and we still won by 7.5% because I learned how to run a primary, and I learned how to run in a general election. But the problem is, in order to win, the two things that are most problematic is, we have the strategy, we just need the manpower and we need the money to make it work. And that's the key. I mean, some people can spend fortunes, but if they have no idea what they're doing, it's not going to make a difference. So one of the things that we've been doing is we've been meeting with people in DC. We've been going to DC, meeting different people in different organizations. I've been to Florida, talking to grassroots groups, and getting, and for example, we spoke to some people who actually, they're volunteer consultants for me, and they said, we have bigger elections for school districts in Florida than you've got as a congressional race, and this is exactly.
Sorry.
So the point is that it's once again is the ideas that I have, and we can talk a little bit about healthcare too. The ideas that I have, are ones that make sense and appeal to people. School choices and better options for your kids, trade schools. The consumer essentially, protection for college students, knowing what they're getting into and knowing and seeing. So I mean, let's face it. If you're going to college and say, "Oh, gee, I really like Russian history," but and say, "I'll get a degree and then I'll just get a job." Well, it doesn't work that way anymore. So you need to acquire skills. So you need to know, and the universities aren't going out of their way telling you any of this information. So you're like going out blind. They don't care. They're big businesses, and there's more administrators in every university than there are professors. Yeah. So, but and then the other big thing that I know more than anything about is healthcare. And we are, once again, healthcare is another huge problem. I mean, healthcare premiums have skyrocketed to such astronomical levels.
Let's call them health insurance premiums, because it's not care, it's insurance.
Well, but yes, but when you're paying for your healthcare, but you're paying for your insurance.
I don't have insurance. We need to we need to separate those. I think.
And you're also paying, co-pays and deductibles, and the reason that healthcare is as messed up as it is because of the government. So when anyone says, "I want the government to take over healthcare," that is the absolute wrong answer.
Oh, well, that's fair.
Because the government has caused the problem. And there are the two main reasons that healthcare are so expensive is too much regulation and too little competition. And both of those things have been caused by the government. I mean, the amount of regulation that exists in the hospital, there are many times more administrators in hospitals than there are doctors treating patients. The government keeps throwing rules and regulations onto the hospital system. And every single one of them, you need somebody to write the rules. You need somebody to understand them. You need somebody else to figure out how to comply with them. And then you need somebody to inspect to make sure you're complying. It's just layers and layers and layers of bureaucracy. And if you look at, I happen to look at medical records, and the average emergency room visit generates about a 50-page medical record.
Oh, good Lord.
And you know, they have all kinds of stuff that there's like they ask about your list, a whole social thing about your living arrangements. They ask about HIV status. They ask there's a whole bunch of stuff that goes. Are you getting enough food? I mean, the stuff that they ask has nothing to do with why you came. So if you broke your leg and you show up in an emergency room, what should the emergency room? They should be X-raying you. They should either be putting you in a cast. They should be, or, if you need surgery, they should be scheduling for surgery. But they don't really want to know. They don't have to know about how many cigarettes you smoke or whether you drink alcohol. I mean, they're simple questions. Those aren't so bad. But your social situation, your HIV status, your vaccination status. When did you get your last flu shot? And a million other things. And of course, the way it works is they have like a triage person, and then you have like a doctor, or a nurse practitioner or a physician's assistant. Then they order tests, and then you come back again, and then they look over the tests, and then the tests get read, and then everything gets documented over and over again. And then they have to do a discharge summary, like what you did, and then go over everything that was done, and then they have to come back and summarize, and then there's like 15. Then they list every single medication they've given you, and obviously all the blood tests they've ordered, which may have nothing to do with why you're there, and it comes out to 50 pages. And the average cost of an emergency room in the Northeast, in New York City metropolitan area, is $3,500. So I mean, you could see, the average doctor you could have a doctor in an office seeing patients all day. It doesn't necessarily even generate that much revenue. So it's kind of ridiculous, and especially one of the things, when they talk about Medicaid, and all the Democrats seem to care about is Medicaid. And yet the Medicaid people, are more likely to abuse the emergency rooms because they have no co-pays and no deductibles. So, there's no skin off their back if they go to an emergency room. It does, and yet in anybody that has any form of insurance, there's a co-pay. And it's a bigger copay for an emergency room, so you might think twice about going. And if you have deductibles, you might think twice about having tests. But if you're on Medicaid, you don't think about anything. And then you're giving this to people that are here illegally. This is another farce. And so you're discriminating where working class people have worse health insurance than people that are here illegally. That to me is the biggest betrayal of Americans that you could find. And yet this is what the Democrats want. And then the other really absurd thing is they have what's called the hospital tax or healthcare tax of 7 or 8%. So now you're paying for your health insurance, and now you use the hospital systems, and part of your insurance premiums is paying a healthcare tax. So you're struggling to pay the premiums anyway, and now they're being jacked up because you're subsidizing the system with a
federal tax, or is that a state tax?
It's a state healthcare tax.
I didn't know.
Yeah.
And the tax is used to subsidize the Medicaid system. So the whole system is geared about subsidizing the Medicaid system, and it's basically betraying everybody else. Mm-hmm. And it's, and once again, when everyone says, these illegals are going to use the emergency rooms anyway, why don't we just give them insurance? Well, why don't we give people that are working class people health insurance first? I mean, why give it to people that aren't even citizens? Because guess what? They're the future voters for the Democrat Party. It's about, they want to attract new voters, and by giving them all these goodies. And it's a totally ridiculous thing. And the other thing they've done is, they put all the private practitioners out of business, and that has to do with the antitrust laws, which are from the 1880s and then to 1914, and they're totally obsolete in this world. And I'll tell you, I'll just give you a story about how crazy these antitrust laws are. So there was and by the way, this is bipartisan. So there was a case in, I think it was in the 1980s or something like that. It was called Alston, United States versus Alston. I think it took place in was in Arizona. And what happened was there were a bunch of dentists, and they signed up for this prepaid, like dental plan. Like people, you pay so much, the insurance company pays so much, and the patients have co-pays for different kinds of procedures. And then they pay, and they get like a monthly. The doctor gets like a month. Dentist gets a monthly stipend from the insurance company for the enrolled people, and then they pay a copay for different kinds of services. So when it came to porcelain crowns, the copay on the porcelain crown was more or less what the dentist paid for the crown, and the dentist was essentially putting it in for free, using their office staff to help them, using supplies to do it. And the dentist said, "This isn't fair." So 50 dentists got together and they sent a letter to the insurance company. In those days, they didn't even, this was in the days when they had mimeographs. This was even before copiers. And so what do you think happens? The insurance company complains to the Department of Justice that these people are violating the Sherman antitrust law, which is from the 1880s. And they prosecute the 3 leaders of this as criminals in federal court. For, and two of them, the case, and the case winds up into the Federal Court of Appeals, and it gets dismissed against 2 of the dentists, and one of them that gets thrown back. But the point is, they were working for nothing, and they were upset, and they didn't even have the right to say we can't work for free. And as a group, because that was a joint boycott under the federal law. I mean, that's how crazy the antitrust laws are. That's how they've driven doctors out of business. That's why they forced all the hospital systems to merge, because the bigger the entity, the greater the bargaining power. And that's what you're seeing, and that's another reason why healthcare is so expensive. So the government is the problem, not the solution.
And on that note, I think we're going to call it, and maybe you'll come back on again.
Sure.
Or if your son decides to run, then we'd love to have him on too.
Now, I just want to tell you 2 things. First of all, if you want to know about my campaign, just go to www.goldsteinforcongress.com. And also, we need volunteers, we need donors. If you want to help the campaign, you want to help me try to change Connecticut, change America, fight for you. That's where you can find me, and I'd appreciate anybody's help. We need, as I said, volunteers, donors, both. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. Anything counts. It all adds up. And I'm fighting for you, and I'm fighting for this country, and I believe that we have the greatest country in the world should not be destroyed by bad government.
We will make sure that your contact information is in the show notes. I always do that.
Great. Thank you.
It's been great having you on. And like I said, maybe if you want to come back, we'd be happy to have you. We always like to have people who are running on more than once, because I think you don't really get a full picture unless you've seen people a few times.
Well,
plus there's a lot more we could talk about with the health insurance.
Oh yeah.
I could talk for hours about it. I was supposed to speak someplace, and I was supposed to give them 20 minutes, and people were talking for an hour. So it's yeah. I know.
That's not even talking about the whole issue that's going on with Epic not giving people their medical records and how everybody's kind of suing
All right,
Epic.
Kay, I am so cutting you off because I have to go somewhere.
Okay. All right.
All right. People of Connecticut, have a wonderful rest of your day. God bless America and God bless Connecticut. And thank you, Dr. Goldstein, for coming on and sharing what's going on. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
My pleasure. I just want to get the message out. That's my job, is to get the message, to educate people. And the more people I educate, the better the chance that we have for positive change.
Good night, everybody.